Well, glad you're all here tonight. Looking forward to continuing our study. You can turn to Mark chapter 9. Go ahead and open up, please, to Mark chapter 9. And we'll begin there in just a moment. Might back all the way up to verse 9 to kind of get a running start into the next section that we haven't discussed yet. But we're in Mark chapter 9, just on the tail end of the account of the Transfiguration on the mountain. And we'll see what Jesus and his three disciples, Peter, James, and John, will encounter after that event. We're in Mark chapter 9. Let's study in a moment. Before we do that, we'll go to God in prayer together. Bow with me, please. Holy God, we're thankful for the time we have tonight to set aside time and to give our full attention to your word, and especially tonight to seeing the greatness of your Son and the life that he lived here among us. We're thankful for his life and his words and deeds. We're grateful for the sacrifice he made on our behalf. Please help us to have greater faith always, to continue to grow in our reliance upon you, our appreciation and love for you and for what you have done. We're grateful for those who are here tonight to study and worship with us. We pray that you would continue to be with each one of us in all of the various ways that we have such a great need for your power and compassion. We're thankful for this time and ask that you would help us to use it well right now. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, we have seen Jesus and his sort of inner circle, as we often think of them, Peter, James, and John. They've gone to the mountaintop after 6 days of travel, probably still in the Decapolis region, most likely somewhere still on the eastern side of the Jordan, although we don't really have a firm definition of where they might have been at this point. But they have gone to the mountain. Something has happened. There has been some kind of change of appearance. Once again, the details a little scant on exactly what that means, that he was changed before them. He refers to a brightening of not only Jesus himself, but his clothing becomes very, very white, a sort of unearthly white, as the way Mark portrays it. It's a shade of white that you couldn't get through any human means. He's glowing. He is very, very, has this presence to him that is really overtaking the entire scene. And not only that, but there appears alongside Jesus, Moses and Elijah with him. Elijah is attached to Moses. Really, we didn't talk about that last week, and it's not a really important detail. Just kind of the way Mark's sentence is structured. It does make it sound as though Moses is kind of the chief figure even of those two. It's Moses and Elijah with him. But whatever the case is, these two men, these two heavyweights of Israel's history, these two greatest among the prophets, these kind of cornerstones of their understanding of God and his relationship to the people, and these very powerful luminaries, dignitaries, appear alongside Jesus. But there should not really be that much interest in them or that much focus on them. And Jesus pulls Peter's attention away from that. And the voice from heaven pulls Peter's attention away from that. This, Jesus, is my Son, and so you should hear my beloved Son. Listen to him as opposed to anything else, and truly listen to him. Don't argue with him. Don't find fault in what he has just told you when it doesn't line up with your beliefs of what a Messiah should be or what he should be doing. Peter, don't argue with him or rebuke him. Hear him, listen to him, be attentive to what he is telling you. And then Elijah and Moses are gone. Jesus is left there with the disciples. And they begin descending the mountain. Now Jesus will tell them in verse 9 that they should tell no one the things they had seen till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is really the last time in Mark's gospel that we will find a command to silence. We'll see some references to things like in verse 30 of this same chapter, where Jesus didn't want people to know where he and his disciples were, that he's still operating a little bit secretively. We'll see in verse 28 another instance of Jesus having a fuller discussion with the disciples in an inside room. We see Jesus in verse 25 of that same account seeming do something quickly so that an encroaching crowd didn't pose too much of an imposition or maybe didn't see or become too much of the scene. I don't know. So even here a little bit later in chapter 9, we'll see a few other things that play into this idea. Is somewhat of Jesus still wanting to manage exposure, but this is the last time that we will see Jesus come right out and say something like, "Don't tell anyone this." The last time that will happen in command form. We've seen it a lot. That's been one of the hallmarks of the first half of Mark's gospel, hasn't it? He does something or someone recognizes him and he says, "Don't tell anybody." Now this is also the first time that there is a provision. What's the modifier? What's the added little bit that Jesus says here when he says, "Don't tell anyone"? Until after I've risen. The first time we have a provision or kind of an expiration date for this order. Tell no one the things you've seen till the Son of Man has risen from the dead. All right. What is this command to silence? And actually, let's first see the next few verses. Start in verse 10. So they kept this word to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, saying, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus answered and told them, "Indeed, Elijah is coming first and restores all things. And how is it written concerning the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wished, as it is written of him." All right. This, especially in verse 9, this order that Jesus gives in this way, does a couple of things. What's the importance of him telling them this? Don't tell anybody till the Son of Man is risen from the dead. Why is it slightly changed now? Okay, maybe just because time is going, time is coming along. But why does that matter? Why would that change things so much? He could have told them from the very first one, couldn't he? Don't tell anyone this until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. So the distance from it really isn't that important in saying, okay, something else is going to happen next. Jeff? Okay. There again, kind of on the same lines, we're getting more to the point of the end is coming, the hour is coming, the time is drawing near, and we saw that kind of watershed in chapter 8, where the disciples understand and are willing to vocalize their limited understanding of Jesus is the Christ, and that does seem to affect things. It does seem to alter his interaction with them, where now we kind of move into a new phase where he is speaking more plainly. He is telling them more plainly what is going to happen. Now the orders are, there is at least the hope of or the expectation of those orders concerning him being relaxed. You're going to have to start telling people about this soon, but not yet. So things are in flux. We are changing right now. We're working towards what he has been working towards. Nathan? Okay. Okay. And we've talked about this a little bit in the last couple of weeks. And their question in verse 10, or the questions that they have for each other, kind of continues speaking to this. This is still not an idea that they can fully grasp at the time of the resurrection from the dead. Jesus has raised people from the dead. He's brought people back to life. We saw it with Jairus' daughter. I mean, we've seen him have power over death already. They know this can happen. Peter, James, and John in particular have literally seen that happen. They at least have been in the room where a very important occurrence of that. But I'm not sure that we still understand what exactly does it mean that the Messiah, as he predicted back in chapter 8, is going to suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. This still goes against their expectation. This still isn't something that fully computes to them, to the point that in verse 9, or verse 10, as we've said, they're still questioning, what does that mean? But maybe now we have a little bit more grounding that Jesus can attach that to, maybe because they've been in the presence of dead men who were walking and talking, that has a little bit more instructive quality now. All right. What, in a basic sense, set aside the timing element of it, why is Jesus telling them at all, don't tell anyone about this until the Son of Man is risen from the dead? What's the point of that provision itself? Ian? Okay, but why then? Why not now? That's a cop-out. No. Yeah. Red. Okay, more believable maybe. Maybe you'd find people would say, I don't know. I mean, that's the hardest part to believe about all of it, that this man is risen from the dead. But maybe telling them the full story explains everything. What sense does any of this make? Maybe not even sense is the right word. What is the point of any of the things that they would be telling anybody unless the Son of Man has died, has been risen? Then we can tell them the full story. We can tell them everything they're supposed to know. We can tell them what truly, ultimately matters. Until his death and resurrection, all other knowledge of Jesus is incomplete. It's inadequate. It doesn't get the job done. It doesn't tell the full story. It's useful. It's good to know. It would be, from a human standpoint, although Jesus doesn't want people doing it, we can see the logic that says, when Jesus has healed my child who is going to die, I want people to know about that. I want people to know that. Why? Because it shows that he's powerful. Because it shows that he has at the very least, a channel open to the divine. And maybe it says that he's God himself. I want to tell people about it when I was out there with 8,000 of my best friends, and Jesus fed all of us with a boy's lunch, and that blew my mind. That was incredible. I want people to know about that so they know his compassion, his love for us, his mastery over the elements. That's useful for people to know. Okay, that's all well and good. But if we don't know the full story, that he suffered, he died, he was raised, then we don't really understand who he is. We don't really understand the full weight. So it is only in the light of his death and his resurrection that he can be understood. And so this is, I think verse 9 is instructive to show us from the standpoint of Jesus, from his mindset, what's the most important part? What really matters? Wait until the story's finished, and then you can tell everybody, because those are the points that matter. Those are the points that you're really going to have down, and you are really going to have to accept if you have faith. Linda, did you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. If you thought some people hated him before, tell them all, yeah, by the way, get rid of Elijah, get rid of Moses. He is greater and higher than them. We already saw a reaction similar to that in Matthew 5-7. Of course, Mark doesn't include that, but in the Sermon on the Mount, he's essentially saying that, you've heard it said, but I say to you, and talking about fulfilling the law and prophets, and that rubbed people the wrong way. So yeah, a statement like this, the natural question is going to be, if somebody says something like that, based on what? On what proof? Why would we think of this man higher than Moses or Elijah? Explain that to me. Well, how about this? He died and was raised. He died and was in the tomb for 3 days, and now that tomb is empty. How does that work for showing proof of concept? How does that work for showing proof of power? And so saving this until afterward does truly make sense from that standpoint. Ron?
At one point, the crowd wanted to make him king.
Yeah, very recently.
So that would have been too early.
Yeah. Yeah, the timing is a critical issue with all of this. Steve?
You know, when we have to have the story of Jesus telling his disciples ahead of time what was going to happen in the future, so that when it did happen, they recognized that he told them about it, and they became believers. They were doubters in Gethsemane. They became believers when they saw his resurrection. But you think that would have the same effect on the public at large had it been broadcast that he was predicting his death, burial, resurrection, that they would see it also and convince it be a stronger motive for convincing.
Yeah. Yeah, there must have just been something in that idea of, and I think it plays into what we're seeing kind of in this general section of Mark, which is a growing of belief. And for a lot of people, I mean, look how much trouble the disciples had with the prediction of his death and resurrection to begin with. That was objectionable to them. These men who think Jesus is the Christ and who are willing to take him on his word about some of the biggest statements that he's made of himself, they struggle with that. If everyone as a whole is told, yeah, he's going to die and be raised again, you're going to have just a lot of people, what little faith they might have could be extinguished. That might be a reason. And we should also say these predictions are not entirely absent from the Gospels, speaking to the whole of his disciples or the whole of his audience, whoever it might have been. They might be veiled, like in John's account where he says, destroy this temple and in 3 days I build it up. That can be pointed to as a prediction after the fact. And there are some other instances where he alludes to what is going to happen. I draw all men to myself if I am raised up, if I'm lifted up in John 3. He's pointing towards the cross. So there would be instances where even non-disciples could look back and say, oh, yeah, he did call his shot on this one.
You know, the disciples obviously knew that Jesus had the power to raise men from the dead.
Yeah.
The problem that they struggled with was, how can man kill God?
Yes. And how can you let this happen, and how does that make sense for our hero to have this happen to him? Jeff?
I'm just thinking the facts that he kept giving them and the proof when it happened, and that verifies his story.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is if he would have let them tell the story, his enemies might have hurt him, killed him before he could do what he needed to do. And he needed that length of time to get the seeds planted, per se, and then have it happen.
And get these men ready. And yeah.
That is another thing, is trying to get his disciples where they need to be at.
Again, timing, a critical idea. And to that effect as well, I think this whole exchange highlights another idea, another point that's being made here, which is the misunderstanding of the disciples, who, even after he says this, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. And the way Mark describes it in verse 10, after that order, they kept this word to themselves. They grasped it and held on to it, questioning what the rising from the dead meant. His statement almost seems to imply they couldn't have done that if they wanted to. They couldn't have told anybody what they had seen if they wanted to, because they kind of didn't understand what they had seen, and they didn't understand its real importance, and they didn't understand what Jesus was trying to show them or talk to them about. They're still limited. They are still in ignorance to a large degree. Partially, through no fault of their own. They're trying, they're working at it, but all right, don't go tell everybody, what you've seen and its importance and what it means and why it's valuable and all of the ins and outs of it. Wait until later. And we're looking at their reaction and saying that's probably a good idea because I don't think they would know where to start. They wouldn't really know what to say in this case, would they? Gary?
It's surprising when you stop to think about these men that Jesus had chosen, and their backgrounds were in various things. They had, most of them, no formal education other than maybe a Hebrew school.
Mm-hmm.
And they were with him for about 3.5 years over time. And I'm reminded of the thing that happened after the resurrection when Jesus joined two men that were going to Emmaus.
Mm-hmm.
And they said later that their hearts burned within them. You know, that trip to Emmaus took, well, it's about 8 miles from Jerusalem. So it took a couple hours from the walking. And in that time, he had that kind of effect on those men. So the apostles were also going to get that. And later on, he was going to give them recall of everything.
Yes. Yeah. All of this will make sense to them. I don't think it does now. And they clearly seem to exhibit that it doesn't really right now. They're questioning what it means. But it will. And he'll be able to open their eyes almost retroactively and say, when we talked about this or when I showed you this, here's what it meant. And here was the full significance of that. What a blessing those men had to receive that education in these things. Well, they ask a question in verse 11. And I think my interpretation of what's going on here with this conversation, I think this is kind of a leading question that they ask of Jesus. Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And I describe that as a leading question because I think they're still in confusion and maybe even a little disagreement about what Jesus has told them is going to happen. That he's going to, well, all the things we saw back in chapter 8, be rejected and apprehended and crucified and buried, all these things. And now here he is once again talking about being risen from the dead. What does it imply if you're risen from the dead? You are dead. So he's going to be killed. And I think it is in somewhat of a pushback against this that they are asking the question, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Because, according to the scriptures, especially according to like Malachi, what happens when Elijah comes back? What does that mean that Elijah comes back? Okay. He will perform some signs maybe. What else? Okay, it's Day of the Lord is going to be attending that in the general program, I guess. Yeah. The day is coming, the day of the Lord. Malachi chapter 3, this figure who comes when he sends his messenger, maybe this is talking about Elijah in their minds, and he's like a refiner's fire, a launderer's soap. He'll purify the sons of Levi, purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to the Lord an offering in righteousness. Or chapter 4, here's this day that is coming. And all the proud and all who do wickedly will be stubble. But you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will arise to you with healing in his wings, and you'll go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. You'll trample the wicked. There'll be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this. He says there in verse 5, I send to you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He'll turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Elijah seems to have a preparatory role for this day of the Lord, but it's one that has an effect on people. It leads to a change in their hearts. There's a refining process. There's a purifying process. People are ready for righteousness. They're a different kind of people. The bad guys have been vanquished. The good guys win. So with that kind of backdrop, when they're asking in Mark 9 and verse 11, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? If Elijah's coming before you and things are going to go like they do when he comes, how is it that you are going to be rejected and crucified? Because isn't Elijah's appearance and his work, wouldn't it negate that? Wouldn't it invalidate that? Because the hearts of the people are going to be turned to the Lord, that we're going to be receptive to you. So explain to me the program. Explain to me how this is going to happen. Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? So if he ushers in harmony and righteousness, how would the Messiah suffer? What's Jesus' answer to that? How does he explain it? First of all, in verse 12, Elijah is coming. He restores all things. But is that the only thing we find in prophecy? Well, no, we've also got to pay attention to this concerning the Son of Man, that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt. You'll find that in prophecy as well. Malachi 4 isn't the only thing we got to be attentive to if we're looking at what happens around this time. Scripture includes this suffering figure, and Jesus seems to be entwining maybe the Son of Man with the servant of Isaiah, and these depictions elsewhere in prophecy of a suffering that must happen. He says that's got to happen. And then he says about that Elijah figure himself. What does Jesus have to say about that? Especially as it relates to suffering, hostility, rejection.
People didn't recognize who he was.
Okay, and so what happened? They did whatever they wanted with that guy. They didn't like him, so they killed him. Who is that he's talking about, of course? Is John the Baptist. And we already saw that happening back in chapter 6. We saw the full record of John being beheaded by Herod. So those two are really the parts of Jesus' response. First of all, there's also scripture about the Son of Man suffering and having to go through all this contempt and mockery and torture. But they did the same thing with Elijah. He suffered too. So yes, there is a sense in which he has done that prophetic work of Elijah. He has restored all things. He has made the high roads low and has leveled the paths and has prepared the way for the Lord. John did that work. But that is not the same thing as saying he has ushered in this new era of enlightenment for God's people where they understand who they're supposed to be and who their Messiah is and what he's going to do when he comes among them, and they're ready to lay aside their pride and all of the glory that they heap up for themselves and their adherence to the tradition handed down by the elders instead of what God has actually said, and all of the things that Jesus has chastised and criticized them for. They're still holding on to those things. There is still an enemy in the world. There is still trouble. There is still an adversary who is working directly against them. None of those things have changed. None of those things have been set aside or dispelled. And so Elijah came, he suffered and died. Now the Son of Man is here, and he's going to have the same fate. The same thing is going to happen with him. So he's kind of gently correcting their idea of what the coming of Elijah means in the first place, as well as the work of the Messiah himself. Comments, questions, anything else to add here up through about verse 13 or so? All right, crystal clear, just the way I like it. All right, let's move on into verse 14. This really continues a lot of the imagery that we saw during the Transfiguration itself. What happens when, you remember we compared the Mount of Transfiguration last week. We looked at it as kind of a counterpart, kind of a companion to Mount Sinai itself. It's not Mount Sinai that they actually are on. But symbolically, it takes on a lot of those same tones. What does Moses find when he comes down from the mountain? Golden calf, idol worship, rebellion against God. Comes down and finds a rager going on. I mean, Israel just totally abandoning any sense that they had and already departing to follow after false god they've made for themselves. Elijah goes to Horeb, Sinai, 1 Kings 19. What's he going to come back to after the still small voice talks to him? Yeah, a lot of the same thing. He's got Ahab and Jezebel are trying to kill him. This dynasty that has ruled over Israel and Judah both are serving Baal. They are worshiping false gods at a never-before-seen rate and fervor. And so he is going to have to execute the Lord's orders to get rid of all of this, get rid of the house of Jehu, get rid of all these people. I got a new leader in Syria. I got a new leader in Israel. I got a new leader in Judah. I got a new guy who's going to come after you. Go and get all of this in order. But he comes down to find kind of the same thing: opposition, strife, struggle. Well, now here Peter, James, and John are coming down the mountain with Jesus, and they're going to find arguments and discord and struggle and strife, and added to that, and kind of the overarching point of verses 14 through 29, weak faith. They're going to find faithlessness in Israel. So Mark's account here, verses 14 through 29, that's 16 verses. Matthew and Luke both give this account in 7 verses apiece. Theirs are not even half as long as Mark's. He gives a lot more emphasis, especially on this father. There's a characteristic of Mark. He gives us the human touch, and the accounts that he does choose to expand, you see a lot more of the pathos, a lot more of the humanity and Jesus himself, as well as the people that he interacts with. So this is one of those accounts that Mark has chosen to sort of expand on here. When Jesus comes down to the disciples, to the rest, you got a great multitude around him, scribes disputing with them, and almost kind of picking up on this immediate theme that we're dropped into. When Jesus speaks for the first time in verse 16, there is even a little bit of confusion, I guess, all throughout these first several verses, with some them pronouns. We're never really sure who's arguing with who, and who's answering him, and who's he talking to. It says he addresses that to the scribes, but what are you discussing with them? But all throughout this, there's been people running to greet Jesus, and we don't know who that is, and we don't know if the scribes are disputing with the great multitude or with the disciples. It sounds like it is the disciples, but there's just kind of a swirl of different groups and different pronouns referring to them, and different people doing different things with the different groups, and there's just this huge mass, this huge chaos that Jesus descends into. Fresh from this glorious scene, the cloud of the Lord's majesty appearing on the mountain, and Peter, James, and John seeing the shining face of the Lord himself, and what a kind of high point there was. And now we come back down, and you got people arguing, and people pointing fingers, and people crying, and people running back and forth, and it's bedlam down there. What this is demonstrating to us, eventually, we're going to find an interjection into this in verse 17, where this man says, I brought my son to be healed. I brought him to you, he says. He was looking for Jesus and found the 9 instead. I brought him to you, and they couldn't do anything. They haven't been able to help. The overarching point, one of them at least, seems to be the disciples are clearly not ready to be without Jesus yet. When he is removed from the scene, they are ineffective. They are incomplete. They cannot do what they need to do. Now, as we've talked about a lot of times, we've mentioned it a little bit tonight, this will not always be the case, in large part because when Jesus leaves, he does not really leave. And this is a big part of what he tells them when he's getting ready to leave. I send my Spirit. The Spirit is going to come. He'll be with you. I'll be with you. You read the book of Acts. We've mentioned it several times in preaching through the book of Acts here in the last year or so, however long we've been doing that. Jesus has already died by the beginning of the book of Acts, and in the first chapter, he ascends through the clouds, and he's gone. For somebody who ascends through the clouds in the first chapter, he shows up an awful lot in the book of Acts, and he is still very active, surprisingly active to a person who doesn't really know what's going on. So Jesus still remains very active, of course, in their lives. So in that sense, we couldn't really say, well, yeah, they'll be fine without him. No, they won't, and none of us would. But a geographical proximity, being in the same room with them physically, they don't have that here in Mark 9, and the wheels totally fall off without that. They need Jesus with them. So that's one point that's being made. But let's see what's actually going on here. We have a few minutes left to discuss. The crowd is astonished when they see Jesus in verse 15. Mark doesn't really explain why. Maybe he's just highlighting the kind of the weight of his presence, maybe some hope from the crowd, although the word he uses, greatly amazed in verse 15, is a word that can verge on a meaning of alarm. They were alarmed, surprised to the point of kind of being on guard. They're shocked when they see Jesus. And I don't know why they would have that strength of reaction, and Mark doesn't explain it. He just likes to show us a lot of times the overwhelming emotional response that people have to seeing Jesus, especially the way the crowd works, the crowd mentality that takes root. And they are all in a state of some kind of excitement, whether that is for good or ill. And you've got scribes arguing with the disciples. And Jesus' question in verse 16 almost seems to be in discussing, in the New King James, that's a very weak translation. It's arguing, it's disputing, it's contesting. This almost seems to be a statement that says, in the same way we would say, why don't you pick on somebody your own size? Why are you arguing with them? He asked the scribes. You're talking to the disciples. Why don't you talk to their teacher? If you have a problem with what they're doing or with what's going on, direct it to me. I'm here. Why are you arguing with them? Seems to be the thrust of what he's saying. I don't think he's really just walking up saying, oh, what are you guys talking about? You know, what's got a math problem, or what are we looking at today? And I'll kind of help you with it. I think he's issuing a challenge of some sorts. I also think, again, my own reading of it, I don't think that is what the argument is in verse 17 when this man starts talking about his son that he has brought to the disciples. I don't know if that would answer for this kind of chaotic dispute back and forth between the scribes and the disciples. It seems more that this is a desperate father kind of pushing everyone else to the side and saying, I don't care what they're arguing about. My son's about to die. He's got these epileptic seizures that have been trying to kill him since he was a child. You're here. You can give some relief. Can we get that done first, and then you guys can continue, Sabbath argument part 9 or whatever we're doing today. But I've got a more important issue. This seems like an interruption into all of that. And I say that largely because I don't know what the scribes' dispute or argument would be with the disciples over that event, over that setup. It could be, but they seem to be two different things. So he tells him about his son. And the conditions or the symptoms, I guess, that manifest, they'll be described or demonstrated 4 different times during Mark's account. He's either going to tell us or show us, what this looks like when this boy is attacked by what's going on. And it is a terrifying thing. It's an awful thing that he is suffering from. Matthew does, in his account in chapter 17, he does refer to it as epilepsy, but also says that it is a demon that is causing that, which gives us a little bit more insight into the frequent weaving together of those two ideas in the Gospels of a physical ailment that is, something that might be something we still have today, but an additional element to it, that it also is, or it is a result of, or it is tied to in some way, a spiritual affliction, that it is also coming at the behest of some demonic adversary. And so I mentioned that just to say, this is, yes, it is very much in line with something you would see from someone suffering from a grand mal seizure, from an epileptic fit, but Matthew, as well as Mark, definitely is saying it's a spirit. It's a spiritual attack that's happening here. Now, I set all of this up to say, and we'll probably have to look at it next week, here's another account in Mark, and we've seen a few of them by now, where we do have a marriage of a seemingly mundane, not mundane necessarily, but a perfectly natural event that is also carrying with it the power of a spiritual adversary. Maybe the best example would be the storm that they endured back in chapter 4, where it is clearly set up as, in the surrounding context and the language of the to be set up as a kind of demonic attack, that Jesus rebukes the waves, that he is facing this adversary who doesn't want him to get to the other side or doesn't want him to do what he's going to do when he gets to the other side. But you have something that's natural, it's perfectly explainable, but we're also saying, yeah, but it's also Satan at work. And this is the same kind of idea. You could get this diagnosed by a doctor, certainly, but you also have an extra dimension that says it's a spirit at work. And that isn't always the case, but it is the case in this instance. So Jesus hears this, and he hears the report that is given at the end of verse 18. I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they couldn't. And his response in verse 19, faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Does not seem to include the disciples. It could. People have argued over this, discussed it. He uses that phrase or talks about a generation, often calling them a faithless generation. He uses that 5 times in Mark, and it never refers to the disciples, or the other 4 don't, at least. He's clearly talking about the people, the crowd. So I don't think he is including the disciples and saying they're faithless. They would have been able to heal him if they weren't faithless. He instead seems to be including sort of everyone else as the faithless generation. That's what the problem is in this case. And will have the child brought to him so that he can deal with what is going on. And then Mark includes this interaction between Jesus and the Father that, again, Matthew and Luke don't really have interest in for whatever reason. Maybe to let us connect to the Father more, maybe to give us some more insight into how Jesus wants to help this man along to where he needs to be. But they're going to have this conversation with each other before Jesus ultimately heals him for the benefit of the Father as well as the disciples who witness it. But I actually don't want to try to get into that tonight. There's a lot of good stuff to be said about it, and I'm a minute over time, I think, already. So we'll pick up next week in about verse 20 and have more to say about this account. Next week in Mark chapter 9, verse 20, we'll see how Jesus deals with a problem that the disciples were helpless against. We'll look at that together in a week. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you.